if the U-2 people will have me back, the Alconbury TR-1 unit had just started, and it was a PCS slot, flying U-2s, flying op sorties, but from the UK over Europe for 3 years. So that sounded like a neat deal. So I volunteered to go into that, and had to go on my last SR-71 deployment to Mildenhall. I went down to Alconbury and interviewed with the ops group commander, the 06 in charge of operations, and just talked to him a little bit to make sure that he was willing to accept me, and he was. So then I flew my last sortie in the SR-71 like I mentioned before, is at Farnborough, from Farnborough to Mildenhall. And 6 weeks later, I showed up at Alconbury as a fully checked out TR-1 driver, because it didn't take me long to transition from one to the other with all the time I had in the U-2. I mean, it was less than a month of actual training. Wow. And off I was going again. So now I spent 3 years at Alconbury. Matter of fact, I think it was my first or second Alconbury sortie. The weather went down at Alconbury, and I diverted into Mildenhall and just taxied into the SR-71 area, and got out and knew everybody. You know, it had only been 6 weeks earlier that I'd flown the SR into there. So it was kind of a neat homecoming.
What was your SR-71 fini flight like?
It was the air show pilot for Farnborough.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. What would you do for that? What was that profile?
Well, the profile is not, it's mostly just show the airplane. So you do a relatively high speed pass, but high speed subsonic below 400 knots down the runway, and show the airplane, do a single engine go around to where you lit one burner, and so the airplane's just fly by a couple of times. People just like to see the airplane. Yeah, and then do a low pass climb up and an afterburner climb out, going to 20,000 feet or so before I had to start pulling things back and letting down to go into Alconbury, which is only 100 miles away or so. So, wow. Yeah, there's nothing special. Like I said, I was tempted for a little bit to do a role, but I think you sometimes get wild hairs up your, but it's better to
discretion.
It's better to discretion. You don't want to be that guy. I'd hate to be known as the only guy that crashed an SR-71 in an air show.
Yeah, that would probably not go too well. So this is the mid 80s now. We're talking like 84.
That's 86. 85? That was July of 86.
Yeah, and so when did you were involved in Panama, right?
I went to I was the ops commander for the U-2 deployment that we had, a short deployment flying out of Panama that was supporting, at that time, the military was doing a lot of support for the anti-drug effort that the United States was going through. And a lot of drugs were coming in from South America. And so the U-2 was quite useful of taking pictures of airfields and other things to be able to figure out, okay, we knew they were flying drugs in from South America and other places, the Colombia area, the Venezuela area, you name it. And there were lots and lots of places. One of the interesting points about flying all over South America while doing that was that going back to Vietnam, in the pre-briefs, one of the things that the intel people would always say, okay, your mission is so-and-so, and here are the safe areas for bailout. You can go here, and that's a good place to bail out, go here. And when we were flying the missions there, we would ask, where's the safe areas for bailout? Well, it's a totally different thing, because in Vietnam, the capture of an American pilot would give you give the bad guys a bargaining chip. And the drug cartels, capturing of a pilot is just trouble. It's pain. So they said that if you were ever taken where any of the drugs were, they would just kill you. And it would be, he said, if you could bail out and if you could parachute into the plaza inside of the embassies at one of the major cities, if you happen to land there, then that would be a safe zone. But other than that,
good luck.
Other than that, try to get as high as possible on any mountain peak you can find. But there was no safe area that we would consider because there was nothing that anybody could do for you if you bailed out over the area.
Wow. So this is early 90s. So that's shortly before Desert Storm, right? I mean, now you're doing Desert Storm stuff.
Yeah. And during Desert Storm, I was the operations officer for the U-2 training squadron. And my squadron commander got chosen to be the commander of the deployed U-2 unit. This was the largest U-2 grouping ever, the most number of airplanes for operations ever. And he was working that. So as the ops officer, you take over when the commander is gone. And so for the entire time, that long buildup between the start of us showing up over there till finally after Desert Storm, I was the operations officer / fill-in commander for the U-2 training unit. And what I had to do is because they really insisted on freeing as many pilots as possible to fill the need of all these airplanes that we had in Taif, which is the air base that they were at in Saudi Arabia. And so typically when you're in a U-2 training environment, your IP is your mobile officer. That's the guy who goes with you to the various places. He's your IP. He's also doing the pre-flight inspection for your airplane. And while you're airborne, he's monitoring the weather and doing everything possible. Well, what I did was realize that if you have a 1-for-1 ratio between the pilot flying and training and the IP, it was pretty wasteful. And so in order to cut down on the number of instructor pilots I had, if you were the IP for a guy who took off and was flying far away on a high sortie, you're going to fly a 4-hour or 6-hour high sortie. In the middle of that, when your airplane was more than an hour away, then you could be the instructor pilot for either a 2-seat airplane, or you could be the mobile instructor pilot for a single-seat airplane. So you're actually mobiling, if you will, or IPing for 2 different people at the same time. And this hadn't ever been done before, but it was a way of taking a guy who's just sitting around reading a book and occasionally checking the weather to make sure everything's going good for somebody who's out over Missouri and going to come back. And there's sure, if he said, hey, I've got a problem and I'm going to go down, well, you got to drop what you're doing and try to help him. But there's not a lot you can do from Beale to satisfy somebody who's going to divert into Whiteman. You know, you can call up the commander there and say, hey, if you've got a couple of 55-gallon drums when the U-2 lands, if you get a couple of guys pulled down on the high wing and walk him to where he needs to go, and then put a 55-gallon drum with a mattress pad on top of it underneath this wing and underneath that wing, you'll level it out and we'll be able to recover the airplane. We'll send a team out to recover it pretty soon because nobody else has little wing stands that go under the wings. So that's the biggest problem.
If it doesn't have the wing stands, it just falls on the runway. I mean, what happens if you divert?
The end of the wing has a downturned little flat plate, which kind of acts a little bit like a winglet, except in the opposite direction. It does the same sort of thing, but at the very bottom of it was like a titanium disc brake pad that runs along the bottom of it, so that as you get slower and slower, and if you can't with full ailerons hold the wing up and the wing goes down, well, you could continue taxiing. We didn't like to, because if that wing were to just be on the runway or on a nice pure taxiway, it's not much problem at all. If you had to, you could drive with it like that. But if it ever caught, like a little bit of separation in a piece of concrete or something to where it would catch it and try and twist it, then you could damage it. But a good pilot who has balanced his wing fuel properly and kept his speed up could actually fly it off the runway, keeping wings level and take it to a certain airplane. And I say good pilot, I don't necessarily mean good pilot, because there are times when the best pilot in the world can try to do it, but there's a reason why we call it the dragon lady, because sometimes you dance with the lady and sometimes you wrestle with the dragon. And when something is not quite right and you've got one wing that's really heavy, because you don't have any fuel gauges in the wing, so you don't know where the fuel is. You can only do it by testing it to get slow enough to see which wing falls off as it starts to stall or accelerate. And so you could get it to where you can't pick the wing back up again, but usually you can clear a runway. There are times when you can take it all the way to parking if it's not too complicated a run. And they used to do that early on, but if you drop one and you catch a taxiway light when you drop it and it wants to twist the wing, then you're in trouble. So not very many airports are set up to have such a wide area, because 55 feet or so from the center line to the taxiway has to be totally clear. And there's a lot of places that didn't work very well.
When did you stop flying the U-2, and what did you do after that? Did you retire from the U-2 at that point?
I retired from the Air Force, the U-2 and the T-38 all at the same time. My fini flight in the U-2 was a day before my retirement. My actual retirement, I was standing up having my retirement orders read to me with oxygen mask marks on my face from my T-38 flight.
So you had two fini flights?
Well, one for the U-2, one for the T-38. Yeah.
So what was your fini flight in the U-2 like? I mean, was that pretty bittersweet since you'd flown it? I mean, you flew that the majority of your career, right?
Yeah. I think so. I got the most hours. I got more hours in the T-38 than in anything, but I got more of operational airplane time in the U-2. Yes. It was kind of bittersweet, but it had to be. There was no going back on it. It was time.
Yeah, and the
24 years.
What did you guys do?
Went out to the MOA in a two-ship and just did two-ship things. But it was just fun. Nothing special.
That's awesome. And so that was 23 years, you said? 24?
24 years in the Air Force, yeah.
Wow.
68 to 92.
That's not the end of your career, though. What'd you do? What have you been doing since then that you can talk about?
Well, I worked for a year for Northrop on the B-2 program.
Really?
In their simulation and training environment. And then in the middle of that year, that was a hard year, because I was living in Palmdale, because LA is a very expensive place to live in. And I looked to try and buy a house, and an 1,100 square foot 1940 cinder block home was selling close to $700,000. And that was close to Pico Rivera. The only place I could afford to live was in Palmdale. And so I had a 92-mile one-way commute every day through LA traffic on Interstate 5.
Oh, God. So
about halfway during that year, Lockheed called me and said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody with U-2 experience. We have a project going on in the Skunk Works. Would you be interested?" I said, "I'm very interested, but I can't start right away." Northrop paid to move me from the Beale area down to Palmdale, and I have a 1-year commitment to them, or I have to pay them back for the move. And they said, "Well, when did your commitment start?" I said, "The 1st of October." And I said, well, that's fine. Would you like to start working for us on the 1st of October? I checked with Northrop to make sure the 1st and not the 2nd was okay. And they said, yep, that's fine. And so I got hired by Lockheed, working in the Palmdale Skunk Works area. Stayed there to 2002, working on various things for the U-2. Was the guy who designed the glass cockpit for the U-2.
Nice.
Yeah. And then about 2002, moved over to Fort Worth because the design of the F-35's cockpit was coming along. It was also a glass cockpit, and kind of wormed into that much larger organization with the F-35. Been working with the F-35 ever since.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Well, your story has been absolutely amazing. Do you have any advice for kids that might be watching that want to be like Stormy, or want to become fighter pilots or U-2 pilots or whatever?
Enthusiasm. Get into it deep. Try to learn as much. Be open-minded so you can receive a lot of things. Don't feel like you know it all, because there's always a different way to skin a cat out there. And just be enthusiastic about it. Don't just try to grasp everything you can. And although there's an adage in the military about never volunteering for anything, I've volunteered to go into so many different organizations that were either, oh, this is a volunteer-only organization or not, and I've never felt bad about doing any one of them. I mean, even going into that GCI business, to where I was going into a non-flying position, I learned a lot. Really enjoyed it. Being in Alaska was a wonderful thing. Being involved with the F-15 when it was first coming out, being a controller who had an F-106 shoot at a Mach 3 Beaumark missile as the drone that we were trying to shoot at, and get the kill, a direct bullet-to-bullet intercept. The missile from the 106 hit the Mach 3 Beaumark.
That is awesome.
Yeah. And so, all sorts of things. Just be enthusiastic about it. I loved aviation. And there's so much going on in this world right now in aviation. I know I'm still involved in it. And that's
awesome.
There are a lot of things. I know a lot of people will say, the F-35, it's, too expensive, to this, to that. It's an amazing airplane, absolutely amazing airplane. And the price is going down and down and down, to where right now I think it's actually cheaper for an A model than to buy the F-16s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
If it's not cheaper, it's right there. I mean, right there.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, what was your favorite, part of your career?
Well, a lot of people phrase that question, which airplane did you like flying the best? And it's easy to answer, the one I'm in. I just loved to fly. And it didn't really matter to me that much. There's something about each one of them that's just kind of unique and neat. The old double ugly, the Rhino, that was the old term for the F4. Being at altitude in the U-2, knowing that if the engine were to fail, I've got so many options within 200 and some odd miles of me that I can glide to. Watching the odometer, if you want to call it that, for people who are not familiar with military terms, count down in an SR-71 to where the impressive part of the SR-71 is that every mile only took 1.6 seconds. So as you are watching the odometer in your car counting down tenths of miles at 80 miles an hour, the odometer in the SR-71 counting down full miles is moving 4 times faster. The odometers are moving 4 times faster than each other. And you're comparing apples and oranges there, but just trying to see that, and the sheer enormity of traveling 30 some odd miles per minute.
Yeah.
It's 30 plus. It's not just 30. But there are some humorous things about it. We used to have one humorous joke when we were in the U-2. Remember, we talked about being adversarial. So one of the U-2 jokes about the SR-71 was, well, the SR-71 does indeed fly faster than a speeding bullet, because a 30-06 has a 3,000 foot per second muzzle velocity, which means it starts to decelerate as soon as it's out of the muzzle. And the SR-71 actually flies faster than 3,000 feet per second for over an hour, so we're flying faster than a speeding bullet. However, if you were to launch an SR-71 and fire a bullet, if neither one of them hit a tanker, they'd both hit the ground at about the same spot.
That's awesome.
That's one of the U-2 things are, but we really, in the U-2, really looked up to, there were some people that going, they get all the glory of the SR-71, they're Gucci wear guys, and, just like F-16 guys and F-15 guys, same kind of thing. But there's a lot of respect for each other.
Wow.
And even the old T-33, the amount of, people might have gotten, oh man, you're going to fly some antiquated airplane that was built in, before the first U-2 was built, and yet learned so much from that. The amount of pilotage I learned from that. One old guy explained to me how I can maintain a course without ever flying across a TACAN or a VOR station, on how to use the back of an EA-6B to plot where I am from somebody to get plot here to there, and I can fly an airway parallel to. He was describing it how he used to fly airways off of Japan without flying over Japan at all, but being right on the airway with only a VOR and a DME in the airplane.
Wow.
And
that's crazy.
You just have to be, smart enough to use that little E6B that they give you, which is a circular slide rule.
Yeah. That's
so,
amazing. Wow.
Just go for it. If you've got something, my thing is enthusiastically go for it. If you don't reach for the highest limb on a tree, well, if you do reach for the highest limb on a tree and you can't quite make it, there's several other branches to catch on the way down. If you go for the lowest branch in a tree, you don't get in the tree at all.
That's awesome. Yeah, that is awesome. Well, sir, I appreciate your time, your story. This has been awesome. Just amazing. Thank you so much for being on the channel. Thank you so much for telling your story. Anything else? Do you have a book? Are you writing a book? Because this is a book.
I'm writing a book, but it seems to be pretty slow going. I've got bunches of chapters. It's here and there, but I'm not so sure anybody else would be. It's just the memoirs of an old guy.
Well, I will give you the same advice I just heard recently, which is do it with enthusiasm and go for it.
Okay. Point well taken. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I hope it didn't digress and go off on tangents as old guys sometimes do.
This is gold. This is gold. Well, thank you so much, Stormy. We appreciate it. Oh, you mentioned you had a call sign on our email. What was the story? You said you had a nickname that was a different Stormy.
When I was flying the Stormy missions, which the actual radio call sign for it was Stormy, they used to call me Stormy Squared.
Stormy Squared.
Yes, I just had picked up my dad had given me my name of Stormy when I was just a couple of weeks old. It comes from naval folklore. They used to use in the Navy a fictitious character called Stormalong AB to relate various stories, sometimes in safety magazines and some other things, and he would be referred to as Stormy. And my real name, very few people know my real legal name. It's Lionel Paul Boudreaux III. My dad was the junior, but none of us ever went, neither my dad or myself ever went by Lionel. That was my grandfather's name. He was the only one that used that name. The only time I use Lionel is when I sign a check or something to that effect. I was Stormy from 2 years old till, and when I came into the military, they just went fine. You know, there was no
Sounds good.
there was no attempt to do anything different. I did hear a couple of the weather guys were envious of that.
Yeah.
Because the nickname of Stormy, or call sign of Stormy, is a good weatherman's call sign. But there's nothing special about that other than the period of time. But it's sure neat when you're flying along and somebody says a call sign, that when it's your same name that you've grown up with for the last 25 years, your ears go like that immediately. You know, there's no Wolf.
Yeah.
Wolf. Oh, that's me. I'm Wolf too. You know.
That is awesome. Well, thanks so much, sir. Appreciate your time. Thanks for being on the channel. We'll keep in touch. If you ever do write that book, we'll get you back on the channel and make sure everybody knows about it.
Well, thank you very much. It's been my pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thanks, sir.